It's not easy to wrap your head every single day of your life.
Where was the point where you looked at hijab culture and you said, oh, there's a very big problem here and I want to tackle it?
What I was seeing was that her visibility necessarily depended on, if she's a Muslim woman, we have to talk about hijab, and whether or not she's oppressed. The Muslim women in Middle Eastern countries are oppressed. They need to be freed, and that becomes part of the justification of war. During British colonization of Egypt in the 1800s, one of the symptoms, how do we know whether or not we've successfully colonized, is if we can get the Muslim men to unveil their women. We're so fixated on how we're represented and who's getting our story right and whether or not we look good. You represent me well, great, but you know what? I don't care. That's not the point.
It's not furthering the purpose of hijab, you're saying.
Hijab doesn't need a purpose. It's religious doctrine. Everyone is accomplished. You are enough just as a human being. Let's say a woman stays home and she doesn't have 72 master's degrees and a PhD and she's not Hercules. Capitalism has played women into thinking that equal rights means that we also have to be in the workforce, and I'm somebody that works.
What's the first step in getting back on track?
Listen, let me tell you something.
Before we start today's episode, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your day and giving this podcast a listen. And I also wanted to remind you that the only way this podcast will ever grow is with your support and with your help. So subscribe to the podcast, like this video, and now let's get the show started. Welcome aboard Middle East Airlines.
والمتوجهة إلى
طيران الشرق الأوسط يرحب
مدينة القدس العربية.
How are you? Why are you laughing?
Go.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good.
I'm good.
Noha, thank you for coming first. And I like to start this conversation off usually is if you were to do some self-reflection, you know, and the most I can get to like a physical form of self-reflection is when you look in the mirror and when you see yourself, like, who do you see?
This is a good question. I see a person that is just trying to navigate this earth in the best way that we can. We are works in progress, trying our absolute best to navigate the world amid turmoil and chaos. And just somebody who is being kind, just trying to be kind, trying to be loving, and most importantly, faith-centered. That's what I would say.
That's a great definition or introduction to yourself, because I think that's very relatable too, you know?
Yeah.
I think that would apply to most people you see, is that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, to just operate from a place of love. And this is, obviously, we are all works in progress. So if I told you that I was a complete human being, that would be very arrogant and that would be very self-righteous, because I always say, like, we're spiritual beings having a human experience as best as we can. That's about it.
Yeah.
You know, you just try to navigate this earth as best as you can.
I like that.
Yeah.
You are a professor.
Yeah.
UM Ann Arbor. Very prestigious school. And I'm very interested to know how you got there.
Okay, so that's a good question. I worked hard. I got my PhD in English Literary and Cultural Studies. So first, let me just backtrack a little bit about that thing about prestige or whatever. You know, I mean, it is what it is. Like, it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's just about doing work.
Right.
Right? Like, so we're there, and I got my PhD in English Literary and Cultural Studies, and I graduated in 2020. And I wrote my dissertation on the politics of hijab in American culture. So, and we can talk about that. And I taught at Wayne State in higher education since like 2014 or 15. And then there was a job opening for the summer. I applied, and from there I got my job. But I want to tell you, I work in the comprehensive studies program over there, and depending on the semester, I teach different classes. But I want to tell you that the true process that led me to Ann Arbor was an absolute belief in myself that I could do it in a tawakkul.
Yeah.
That I would say that I could get there despite, societal expectations of what a Muslim woman can achieve or what, is possible or for you. And I'm not saying that this is the impetus of accomplishment, but you're asking how I got there. I got there quite literally one day. I went to campus and I spoke to my outside reader who was on my dissertation committee. So you have like 4 people on your committee that read your project. There's a director, and then there's 3 others, and there's an outside reader.
Can you explain the dissertation just for people that don't know?
So the dissertation, once you get your PhD, you write this body of work. This is going to kind of set you up for the research that you do in your graduate studies. It's like your big capstone project. Mm-hmm. And then obviously like you continue that body of work when you're done. I just had a peer review article come out from that body of work. Obviously it looks a little different than it did in the chapter. But my point is that when I went to campus and I had a meeting with my outside reader, her name is Dr. Evelyn Sultani. She works at USC now, the University of Southern California. Yeah. And that day I thought in my head like, wow, I would love to work here, And so as I always tell the story, because we're going to get to like how you can achieve what your mind believes is possible. And I don't mean this in a cliche way. I mean it fundamentally in terms of how Islam says it in its doctrine. So I left campus that day. We had a meeting and I was updating her on the research and how the project is going. And it was a cold winter day. And I remember leaving campus. I was on State Street and I closed my eyes. And with everything inside of me, I prayed that this would one day be my work. And then I opened my eyes so I wouldn't get into a car accident. Yeah. And then I let it go and I just drove. And there were obstacles in between. Obviously, I had to finish my dissertation. That was a struggle. And, I think between the time I had that meeting and then the time that I actually got my job, I think there was maybe 5 years.
Okay.
But alhamdulillah, like I do feel like, the path unfolded and you just stay persistent. But most importantly, you have to feel and visualize that. You have to have a belief that it's possible for you. Yeah. For anybody, not just about your work, it's just about everything. So, yeah.
I'm glad to see that happened.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
And you, of course, and we're going to get a little bit into that more, but what's interesting is, what was the title of your dissertation, you said?
The Politics of Hijab in American Culture.
Okay, that's a very big word, that's a very big topic, right?
Yes.
And your dissertation is over 250 pages long.
Yeah.
So I would assume you would have to be very passionate about the topic to write 250 pages on it. But before we start talking about hijab and the American culture and all of this stuff, I want you to take me back on your journey as a hijabi in the first place,
mm-hmm.
From when it started, the struggles, and what got you this passionate about the topic of hijab.
Okay. So I wore hijab when I was 9. And like at the time I was actually at a Catholic school, and I wanted to wear hijab, and it was against dress code. And I ended up waiting until the summer and I put it on, and hijab has always been, part of my identity because I've always been, even from a very young age, I always made the connection between, like, while I was at a Catholic school, for example, between like the Virgin Mary, always the representations of the highest quality women or highly regarded women in all these religious doctrines she was always veiled and modest.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I always made that connection, even as a young girl, even in a Catholic school when I was little. And I was always passionate about it, obviously. But as I grew up, I have to really insist that this wasn't always just something that was ingrained in me, hijab, and that I've had moments or times in my life where I've just fallen in love or like renewed my vows with this practice because, in my opinion, and especially, I did write about the hijab, but I want to talk about how my research is not just about hijab. My research I'm not a religious scholar at all, but and we're going to digress. I'm going to finish with you the question about hijab, but I've fallen in love with hijab time and time again because what I've found to be the reasons why Muslim women would wear hijab, or when you go back and you read the doctrine itself, kind of separate from what culture tells you about hijab, there's a lot of misconception about why Muslim women should wear hijab or what they're trying to cover or what they're trying to do. If I could just tell you very quickly, hijab is for men and women, and God, first of all, talks about it in the Quran. He prescribes it to men first, right? In the surah. But importantly, it is a practice that it's a daily commitment. It's not easy. It's a daily commitment that reminds or encourages us to achieve the highest qualities in human character on a daily basis. So that when you are in public spaces, what people perceive of a Muslim woman in hijab, they know what to expect from her. Like, we embody, like, it is an embodiment of values. It is a code of conduct. It is a moral roadmap, right?
Yeah.
But importantly, we wear hijab in public spaces. Why? Because when you see a Muslim woman, you know what you can expect from her. And I'm not saying we're all a bunch of infallible people running around the earth. We're all on our journeys and we're all trying our best.
Like you said in the beginning, we're on this.
We're all on our journeys. We're all trying the best that we can. We're doing the best that we can. But for somebody that is dealing with a Muslim woman or Muslim man who also practices hijab in his behavior, you know that what you're getting is someone who, for example, embodies good virtues. Honesty, she has good work ethic, she is kind, she is honest, she has integrity in her work or wherever these public spaces are, that she is navigating for the outside world. And it is a physical veil that enables you to navigate these public spaces with your intellect at the forefront of whatever it is that you're doing.
Yes.
But hijab is not made to hide your beauty, because Muslim women are beautiful, and it is a beautiful thing. And it's not so that you can be less attractive in the sense that people are not going to look at you. You're not supposed to hide.
Yeah.
You don't have to hide, but it is this barrier between you and your personal space. And it puts your intellect and the work that you're doing or the things that you're saying at the forefront of who you are when you are in these public spaces. So I always say, like, sometimes the way we frame hijab is really discouraging. And of course, people can embody these high virtues with or without. I mean, you don't need.
Do you feel like it puts you in check, though? Is that what you mean?
It is a daily reminder.
When you look in the mirror and you see yourself putting it on before you leave the house, like, you're thinking about this stuff.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm going out into society.
Commitment. It is a daily commitment. It is not easy to wrap your head every single day of your life. You wrap your head. It's not easy. You have to think about it, but it's also a commitment. And it is, and when I say commitment, that's a big thing. People commit to things. It's easy to not commit to things.
Yeah. It's harder to commit to things to not commit.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. But what I want to go back to is that's not to say that people that are not wearing hijab are not embodying these high human, like these
Absolutely.
high human character. But when you see a Muslim woman, it's different. The visibility of a Muslim woman signals that she is embodying these values, and these are Islamic values, and that this is her code of conduct. This is her daily reminder on how to navigate these public spaces. And I think that that's a really important thing. And it's a beautiful thing. I don't think that Muslim woman, the credit is from God, right? Like,
of course.
And it's ultimately and it's ultimately a religious practice. But I think if we understand it, it makes it easier to digest.
Yeah.
It makes it easier to practice, and it saves us from the conversations that we hear a lot on why people are discouraged from wearing it or from taking that step, or when they, take it off. If we understand the function, I think it becomes easier.
Yeah, with anything in life as well. Like what you're saying is you have this clear purpose, and you just very eloquently put it into words of why you put it on each morning. So if you have you're putting this physical thing on your head, and you have on paper why you think this is important to you, it makes it a little easier to go about your day to day.
Definitely. It makes it it's an embodiment of who you are.
How did you struggle with it though, Noha?
It's probably annoying to hear me say, but I think hijab has given me so many advantages. It's all in how you perceive it. Mm-hmm. If you attune yourself to good, and we'll get to that part of that conversation later, but if you attune yourself to good, if you're looking for ways that it puts you at a disadvantage, you're going to find ways that it puts you at a disadvantage. Okay. If you attune yourself to good so much that only good shows up, for me, hijab has given me so many opportunities. And I'm not going to say that I've never been discriminated against. I've never felt invisible because of it. I've never, but those things are so minor and not important to the beautiful things that have come, I think, because I wear a hijab. Yeah. Because you are, for a multitude of reasons, I think that Muslim women are so complex and beautiful and deep. Some of them. Maybe I'm generalizing. Maybe I just see a lot of.
Or you're around the good people. You're around the right people.
Inshallah. Yeah, inshallah, for sure. Yeah, I am. But the point is that it's put me at an advantage. I think that if you can, I think that for me, because I've been very clear about the work that I do, very clear about, in these higher educational spaces, and the work that I do is, I'm really passionate about the work that I do. I've walked into opportunities. I've been given, opportunities, and I've delivered when I've been in these opportunities. And so for me, I never feel like I've never felt like it's been a struggle, but maybe just the struggle in and of itself of just maintaining a commitment. But it hasn't been that hard.
Do you think young girls' perception is what's making them struggle? Because you're hearing this term a lot, especially nowadays. Everyone's struggling with the hijab, and you see this trend of people removing it from people that call themselves influencers to the ninth grader, and everything in between. It's becoming a trend and being framed as this is a struggle, and when I take it off, I'll fly, and all of this stuff. And I know that's what your body of work is centered around. but I want to know, where was the point where you looked at the hijab culture and you said, oh, there's a very big problem here and I want to tackle it?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way to frame it, because that's exactly what I saw. And so what I was seeing was that, okay, so the visibility of Muslim women, which in public spaces and these narratives by Muslim women, or, okay, so public media perception or the ways in which we're represented. When a Muslim woman is visible, what I was seeing was that her visibility necessarily depended on discussing herself in terms of hijab. Always, she's nothing more than whether or not she wears hijab. If she's a Muslim woman, we have to talk about hijab, and whether or not she's oppressed. Specifically, the conversation of freedom. And so I asked why. And what I was finding in a lot of the scholarship that I was searching in, so how can we approach this conversation that is shaping all of our lives?
Yeah.
How can I approach this conversation from a scholarly, how can I make a scholarly interjection in this? So this is why I say I'm not a religious scholar, but let's just talk about this from a pragmatic perspective, or from like a logical perspective, like what's happening here. And so what I found was that the visibility of Muslim women necessarily depends on this conversation on whether or not she's oppressed. Cultural analysis, which is like the politics of representation, always talked about, the packaging of the Muslim woman, or you would see like in political discourses when a Muslim woman would be visible, she'd be, let's say she was hijabi, I'd see she'd have to be like this hyper accomplished woman of like 16 master's degrees, and she jumps through hoops of fire. Or in novels, various modes of cultural production. So whether it be novels, memoirs, fiction, political discourse, I kept seeing the same thing. The politics of respectability, in a sense, where like who gets to be visible and who gets to tell our story, and what does that story look like? And I wasn't even at the point of like how Western media or American media is representing us, but it's like, how do we represent ourselves?
Yeah.
And we are forced
you're conforming in a way to what they want you to do.
But it's inadvertent.
Yeah.
They're not doing it on purpose. That's really, really important. It's that our visibility depends on it. So But
you think a lady that knows she's going on live TV wearing the American flag as her hijab, she's doing it inadvertently, or she knows she knows exactly what she's doing?
No, she knows what she's doing, but this is what the constructs that have shaped our reality have given us access to. So she doesn't necessarily think that she's peddling concepts of like neoliberalism, like ideological concepts of neoliberalism, where these freedoms, that this conversation on hijab and oppression and freedom is shaped by capitalism, is shaped by an ideological framework that tells us what freedom is, and that same freedom then becomes blurry and is used to justify war overseas.
Why do you think capitalism has a hand in it?
I'm going to make that connection for you in just a second, but
Okay.
The most important thing is that we backtrack for a little bit. What I see in these self-narratives of Muslim women is that U.S. government policy bleeds into the way that Muslim women and other marginalized groups represent themselves or understand themselves. So importantly, I want to say that it's not just about Muslim women. It's that by looking at hijab, we can understand this relationship between U.S. government policy and self-representation and identity, and the ways in which we compete for recognition by the state, by the state meaning the nation. And it's an unlikely alliance. You would never think the two are connected. You would never think, what does this have to do with this?
Yeah.
But they are, because if you say capitalism is the structure that determines everything, and what is the goal of capitalism? It's the financialization of everything. It's to accumulate the most capital, okay? How do we push capitalism? We need an ideological framework, one that everyone can accept. And what is the most common idea that everybody accepts and is invested in? Freedom. So then freedom becomes different things for different groups of people, but we all invest in it. Because nobody would say, for example, that they don't want freedom. No, please, just oppress me. Yeah. No, I don't want these people to be free, and I don't want these people to be free. So therein, you see a connection between a religious practice that has nothing to do with freedom. God doesn't say in the Quran, لِتَكُونَنَّ أَحْرَارًا. Ahrara, it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we are visibly in public spaces, when we are self-narrating, the conversation almost always centers on freedom.
So what I find interesting in what you just said is that America basically goes to this marginalized group, and rather than, let's just say Muslim women, rather than them knowing exactly what this hijab is for them, like you just explained just a few minutes ago, they tell them that what you have, like, America is telling you that this is a form of oppression.
Yes.
And then you basically,
it seeps into the way you understand yourself.
Yeah, that's how you understand yourself now. So okay, I'm wearing this,
and so then you say oppressed. Yeah, or you say, or on the flip side, Jafar, this is really important. You say, no, this gives me freedom.
Yeah.
No, I'm not oppressed. Because you think that that's resistance. Yeah. But what I ultimately argue is hijab and freedom one way or another. Rather than questioning whose freedom, what does this freedom look like? How does this freedom inform U.S. policy in its interests like in overseas countries? You say, no, I am free with it. Both are two sides of the same coin. Any linking of hijab to freedom, we need to move away from that conversation.
So basically, even participating in that conversation, because that's the answer. Yeah. If I come and I tell hijab, you're oppressed, she's like, no, this actually gives me a lot, like, I'm actually very free, and I'm like, I don't care about all this materialistic stuff that whatever like girls are looking for. I'm free within my own body and stuff.
Yeah.
And so you're saying even that is playing into what they want
to a certain extent. Yeah. But listen, it's not like we're going around harming people. But what I'm saying is there's a link rather than like, it's a personal choice. You might very much feel free because this is the language that we have access to.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you think between you and yourself, you do feel free.
You feel free, but freedom, the concept of freedom as it's constructed or predetermined, the language within which we are all used to. Neoliberalism, if you accept that neoliberalism is this like ideological framework that informs government policy, it informs U.S. policy overseas. Like, remember the war in Iraq, for example, it was called freedom, right? Yeah. Like Operation Freedom or Enduring Freedom.
They wanted to free the Iraqiyya.
Exactly. And so the same, or, the Muslim women in Middle Eastern countries are oppressed. They need to be freed. They don't have freedom.
Yeah.
So then, like, the American Muslim woman becomes this prototype of what the free Muslim woman looks like, and we have to free her counterparts overseas.
Okay.
And that becomes part of the justification of war. So this is why I say how all marginalized groups, hijab is just an example of how all marginalized groups are conditioned to invest in their own subjugation or marginalization, how we're all kind of doing it without even realizing it. And this is why I say it's inadvertent, but for certain, it wasn't Muslim women that decided to equate personal choice, religious practice, what you do in your life to freedom. That was neoliberal constructs that decided, oh, let's make this conversation on Muslim women and whether or not she's oppressed and whether or not she is free. Yeah. And if you look back in history, you look back at the work that, some of this work that was revealed to me through this process is that sure enough, Like in the 1800s in Egypt during British colonialism, it depended on unveiling the women, on the Muslim woman.
What do you mean?
Like during British colonization of Egypt in the 1800s, and I don't want to go into like this boring history, but one of the symptoms I think Cromer discussed was how do we know whether or not we've successfully colonized is if we can get the Muslim men to unveil their women.
That's one thing they wanted to do.
Yeah, and it's in, I quote it, it's in the
dissertation.
Yeah, it's in the dissertation, but it's in history, most importantly. Yeah, it's in history, and so we don't realize this. So this is why I say it's inadvertent.
Why do you think they targeted women?
Muslim women?
Yeah. Why was that their target, do you think?
It's
if they wanted to colonize, why focus on the Muslim woman?
Well, let me just say that Muslim women at the time, hijab was, during that society, hijab was, or historically I should say, historically hijab in like Egypt, for example, was reserved for the upper class.
Okay.
And it wasn't just a Muslim thing. Rich women, rich affluent women were the ones wearing hijab. But it is a visible Is it because it's the flag?
Yeah,
it's a visible visible identity marker.
Yeah.
And it is a clear distinguisher between Muslim parts of the world and non-Muslim parts of the world is this fixation on hijab. But let me tell you, it's also this way to peddle this notion of freedom. And you see this happening right now in our current world. It's reproducing itself. So mechanisms of U.S. imperialism are reproducing themselves in the state of the human condition right now. Like you see it in Iran, for example, the conversation of hijab, how when U.S. media covers...
That's the first thing they bring up.
It's freedom. And this freedom leads to blurry notions of freedom that now we need to free them. They are oppressed. And you think that they're not connected, but they actually are. And I don't want to complicate it so much by going into it, because I know at the end of the day, this is like, we just want to scratch the surface of how these things are connected. But Jafar, I really want to say that I'm not a religious scholar, It's like, you know what you are and you know what you're not. I'm not trying to like give fatwas on hijab or tell people how to wear or tell people how to talk about it. But most importantly, there's two things that emerged from this body of work. Number one is that rather than like questioning who's making this freedom, we are to a certain extent conditioned to, think about ourselves through identity politics and the politics of representation that ultimately take us in a circle. Guess what? We're so fixated on how we're represented and who's getting our story right and whether or not we look good.
Right.
You represent me well, great. But you know what? I don't care. That's not the point. Is the politics of representation, it takes us nowhere.
Yeah.
It takes us nowhere because if
to
you
further
look
the
at,
actual purpose
yeah,
of the
because
hijab,
look, if you look at self-narratives of Muslim women before and after 9/11, which is probably what we would assume the visibility of Muslim women, it was the most prominent post 9/11. That's when we were backwards, terrorists. It's not true though. The U.S. media historically, and I can cite you so many sources, but you can just go to the work cited. So many sources that show how the representations before, pre and post 9/11 was largely the same. And we've hardly made progress in terms of complexity. So my point was like cultural analysis on representation, how a Muslim woman is portrayed by the media is getting us nowhere. What are the frameworks that are making what freedom is and linking a personal practice to a political ideology?
Yeah, but I think that you see how you just said that we're so fixated on like good representation. Like people might look at you and like, oh my God, she's a professor and I want to be a professor. She's a hijab. She's a good
cares?
representation. But I think that bad representation in the media is what makes young girls look for good representation. I don't know if you know Halima Aden, I think her name was.
Yeah, of course.
And she had like, it was very bad, like what they were doing to her and how they were making her wear like jeans as her hijab and stuff. Like you would call that bad representation. So your typical Muslim woman would look at that and be like, that's so bad how we're, so this girl is representing how hijab is, you know, she was one of the most famous models. And then at the other side, she looks at someone like you, for example, and she's like, oh no, I'd rather very much Noha be in the spotlight than someone like that.
Sure.
Regardless of how Halima fixed her situation after.
Sure. Listen, I'm not going to say that representation is not important at all, but it's secondary because it's not really, it's not getting to the core of what's shaping us to get to this point.
Right. It's not furthering the purpose of hijab, you're saying.
It's not just furthering, not just the purpose of hijab. Hijab doesn't need a purpose. It's religious doctrine.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, in terms of understanding the systems that we work within, we're never getting to the real answers if we're just trying to say who's this, who's that. Because you know what it does? You know what the risk of that is, Jafar? It's that it also marginalizes women who are not so accomplished. Everybody's accomplished.
Right.
Let me just backtrace.
Yeah.
I can't believe everyone is accomplished. You are enough just as a human being. You don't need to have clothes that are designer. You don't need to have resumes. You don't need to be working. Like, let's not even get into that conversation of capitalism and how.
Because I think that's what they did too. Other than showing how, like playing with the image of hijab like that, they also pressured the woman in general that now you have to leave the house. You can't even be at house or you're not worthy of anything.
And guess what? Islam was the antidote for that. Guess what I also found in my research?
What?
Islam is the antidote for that. Because let's say a woman stays home, that's work. First of all, let's call that what it is. But let's say she stays home, okay, and she doesn't have 72 master's degrees and a PhD, and she's not Hercules, and she's just a regular. She's just a human, and then she stays home and she's with her kids. American capitalism, okay, has played women into thinking that equal rights means that we also have to be in the workforce. And I'm somebody that works. I'm just consciously aware of this. But they have to be in the workforce and, you have to make a wage. And then what happens? She becomes resentful. She's overworked. The burden of the house is a lot of the time still on her in order for her to feel respect. And we see it in our own community. Let's not even play ourselves.
Definitely.
But guess what? Islam was the antidote before capitalism. Okay, so you have like communism on this side, you have capitalism on this side. I always say like Islam is the perfect balance because it was the first religion that says that women in general, they can demand to get paid for that housework. It recognized housework not as historically the way capitalism did, like, oh, it's free and it's free labor that we don't recognize. No, Islam said this is work and she can demand to get paid on top of her wages. And obviously I want to nuance that. I don't want anybody to come after me.
Right.
But you can nuance that because a happy woman in her house will do it as a labor of love.
Absolutely.
And she will give selflessly. But there is a system in place that protects her. Yeah. That only Islam gave us. Islam gave us the right to vote before capitalism ever gave women the right to vote. It gave us the right to own land. It gave women. So when people ask me, like, I always get the question like, oh, are you a feminist? I'm an Islamist. That's all I need. Yeah. To help me navigate the world around me and to help me, try to live and aspire to be my best human self. We are spiritual divinities or beings impervious to the senses, I guess. But do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So So that was the important thing.
I just remembered that I saw a clip of it's funny, but it just shows that how like Americans think. Donald Trump this is like a 7-year-old clip. He wouldn't name who told him this, but he was like, someone wanted us to go into Iraq because they wanted the women there to not wear their hijabs. And then he said, but I watched an interview for a like Muslim woman there, and they were like, why don't they want us to wear them? We've worn them for 1,000 years. Like, leave us alone. Like, we want to wear them. And then he said, if they actually want to wear them, why the hell would we go inside and tell them not to? Like, they want to, you know? So it kind of plays back into they want to, like, playing superhero. Like, we have to save.
It's the savior complex. There is that part of it. Frantz Fanon talks about that too. Even in terms of like colonization in Africa and in Nigeria. But importantly, he says this thing where it's like when you unveil a woman, it's like peeling a layer off of her skin.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that.
Wow.
I feel that even now. I feel like in a sense that's what happens. But importantly, yeah, it's deeply connected. Look, we can go back and go into that because you have asked me a few times, why do I think the hijab is the site? And obviously for the obvious reasons, because how do you know that you've colonized the people? You get them to dress like you.
Yeah.
And you get them to visibly look like you. And those are easy reasons. But if you go back to the scholarship, America has, or the United States, or, you know, like countries that are colonizing other parts of the world, a lot of the nation is constructed through gender politics.
Yeah.
Right? Through gender identity. Yeah.
Especially now.
Yeah. A lot of it is gendered. So it wouldn't be a surprise that a lot of this forms on the backs of a lot of like imperial practices, U.S. imperialism, cultural, economic apparatuses that the United States will try to construct a narrative in order to justify its practices overseas, just to say what U.S. imperialism is, if we're not already clear. But it necessarily depends on a woman, on the backs of Muslim women. And this is why that peer review article in chapter 4, I talk about the one that emerged from chapter 4. I say why wearing the American flag hijab is so harmful, because historically speaking, not only has the flag masked horrible colonial violence, including the usurpation of indigenous lands in our very country, but most importantly, if you look at politics overseas, that a lot of it's depended on the backs of Muslim women. When we wrap ourselves in the American flag and we let the American flag supersede our religious practice, we merge these two. It's like I feel it's an intellectual violence that's happening.
Very disrespectful too.
They're not doing it on purpose though. But it's just, if you're not aware of these histories and you keep circling in cultural analysis, who gets to represent, I'm going to wear this flag on my head. Yeah. You know, you miss these important things. And that's my point in that body of work, is that you miss these really important moments in history where this kind of understanding will be like,
What should the young Muslim women do in this case? Listening to this, you know, now being aware of how this all plays to her disadvantage as a Muslim woman, right?
Yeah.
What's the first step in getting back on track?
To just know who she is with certainty. And that's not an easy practice, but to just listen, let me tell you something.
Tell me.
A Muslim woman, her greatest, any woman, any person, this is men and women, any person, their greatest source of self-regard is your relationship with God. Right. And so the state of the human condition is in turmoil. Social media is operating on everybody, right? And I wish I could say, like, these conversations like, oh, social media is destroying us. There's a lot of good that's come from social media, but in terms of capitalism and the influencing culture and
how
consumption,
fake it is
the superficial, the illusion of social media, it's making it very difficult for young Muslim women to navigate these spaces because they're chasing something they're never going to keep up with. The only way to detach from that is to just go back in. To just go back in and develop that sense of self, to know exactly who you are. Because if you are trying to find who you are and these external factors are operating on you, you're never going to find it.
Yeah, it's not, you
have
can't
to
win
know
that
who
battle.
you are. Yeah, you can't win that battle. And then trust and tawakkul, is just like understanding who you are, and then all of those things fall into place. But, do you want me to tell Muslim women, like, take the leap of faith and veil? I want to tell that to both men and women. Mm-hmm. Take the leap of faith and veil. Of course I'm going to say that.
Oh, really?
Of course I'm going to say that. Take the leap of faith and veil, because, like I said, if you're thinking of the hijab from its purpose as a moral code of it's a moral code of conduct that enables us to reach our highest selves, to achieve or strive towards the highest qualities in human character, there's no bad that can come from it.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But
even if they didn't wear it properly.
If you're waiting for everybody to be perfect, we're never going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no prerequisite in the Quran either. When you're ready, when you are perfect, when you have achieved infallibility.
Do you think putting it on at 9 helped?
I think it's easier when you're younger, for sure.
Okay.
I think it's definitely easier when you're younger, because because your identity is still forming. It's not necessarily 9, right? Like, certain scholars say that it's when you reach the age of puberty or 12. Yeah. So whatever, like 9 is just a relative age, but the younger, it's not relative, but what I'm saying is it's, determined.
It's a conversation.
It's a conversation. It's predetermined by a multitude of factors, but
those external factors didn't get to you at that younger age.
No,
so
and
they can't tug at you at that younger age.
No, yeah, you're highly, it's easier, you are. And then, but look, let me just tell you something. Just because I put it on at 9 doesn't mean I didn't struggle with it throughout my life. And just because I put it on at 9 doesn't mean that I didn't have to constantly renew my love for it. I wrote my dissertation at 32 years old, okay? Ooh, it took me a few years too. So during that time, and it had nothing to do with the religious practice. I think I quote the Quran one time. And the whole thing, just to footnote. Okay. That, by the way, this is what hijab is.
Yeah.
By the way, this is why we do it. By the way, this is what the verse says. I think I did it one time in the whole dissertation. Nothing made me fall in love with hijab more than understanding, than that body of research. Yeah. And I insist, I say, it's not just about hijab. It's about the ways in which mechanisms of U.S. imperialism, government policy, permeate into our daily lives, such that the way that we understand ourselves, it bleeds into the way we understand ourselves and the ways that we narrate, albeit unlikely alliances. They form unlikely alliances, but they peddle the U.S. narrative that is used to justify practices overseas. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense to me, but I agree with what you said, but there's something in me that doesn't believe in anything that there's only one reason for a certain like something like this. Like, I don't think like only that would be what affected it. So
for sure, this is only one perspective. I think we're on the same page. I think we're on the same page.
I think so too.
There's not only one way to look at this, and not everybody would agree.
Oh, of course.
That these conversations of oppression and
It was the
freedom
first time
are
that I
harmful.
heard of it after reading like what, and when we had a conversation, that was the first time I like it opened my eyes to this stuff. But do you think, now I'm thinking of maybe parents growing up, you have when someone has a daughter, you start teaching them why they're doing this, why they're
Yeah.
putting it on,
Yeah.
and it kind of acts
Yeah.
like protection before they get hit with life and with all these external factors.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like
From everything that you said, the biggest obstacle is understanding hijab,
yeah.
as a
Yes.
Muslim woman, understanding hijab.
Understanding it.
Because if a Muslim woman understands hijab to its full extent,
Yeah.
she wouldn't be that fazed by what's happening.
No,
She
but we
wouldn't,
don't
that wouldn't attract it.
Yes.
But when there's a problem with the understanding of
Yeah.
why I have to put it on, it's not like you have to put it on because you have to put it on. Understand what it means. What it becomes easier to navigate through life.
Let me tell you something too about that. It's if you are, I think it's definitely important, okay, to understand.
Mhm.
There's always hikmah behind everything.
Of course.
Like subhanallah, there's hikmah behind everything, and God tells us keep asking, keep questioning, keep understanding. It can be enough for certain people to just be like, you know what, these reasons don't make sense to me, but I'm gonna put it on because this is what God tells me.
Right.
And for men too, that I
Absolutely.
have to practice hijab
Yeah.
in my mannerisms, in my code of conduct, and how I handle myself, and how I communicate and deal with the other gender,
Yeah.
right? But it can be enough to just say that this is a religious practice. God prescribes it to me in the Quran. I don't understand it, but it's enough for me. And I don't necessarily like it either. You don't have to be in love with it. Everybody wakes up in the morning and they're just cheering that they have to lift themselves and they go out in public. I'm not saying it's this daunting thing.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is some people feel like that.
Of course.
And I don't invalidate those feelings. But there is, the good thing is about our merciful God and about the master of the universe is that there's always hikmah. There's always reason behind salah. And we'll talk about that. Behind salah, behind fasting. There's so many things that scholarship or what we're reading now and science and stuff, and they're just now catching up with what is already in our faith. And that kind of like leads me to this new body of work that I'm working on, which is like Islam and as a tool of self-development. But most importantly, it's, you have to teach. A lot of times our cultural understanding of hijab, for example, just so that we can wrap up that conversation with a beautiful bow, is that, if you talk open conversations, safe spaces, where Muslim women can express themselves without the fear of getting shunned, and like teaching our daughters the function of hijab, besides, just like this cultural interpretation that is really so reductive.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're not, so that you can hide your beauty. Modesty is not about hiding your beauty. And hijab is a modest practice. Absolutely it is. And it is to sidetrack from like the physicality or, a certain type of like attraction that is distracting, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
We don't become ugly. You make your daughter think that she becomes ugly when she wears hijab, or that she's not supposed to strive for beauty. And nadafatu min al-iman, she should look beautiful and kept and neat and organized. And, there are beautiful ways. It's just not those ways that we teach our kids.
Yeah.
And so new conversations on hijab that inspire girls to not just embody and feel happy.
Yeah.
And feel excited about it and feel like they have a purpose and a mission that's bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
when they navigate public spaces. This is not about the self. This is about commitment to your community when you go out in public spaces. This is about contributing to the world in meaningful ways. This is about a common language, an unspoken language when a group of women are wearing hijab, or when you run into one woman that's in hijab. It's like the unspoken code of conduct by which we all abide.
Yes.
That's a lot more fun and festive than saying, so you're not beautiful.
Yeah.
You know?
But you said new body of work about Islam and self-development.
Yeah.
That's very interesting because
Yeah.
self-development, from everything from meditation to intermittent fasting to all these things that they're so nice to talk about and they're so nice to dive into. You know, everyone wants to, well, like we said, again, the whole point is we're on this journey to better ourselves, you know, and Islam and self-development. It sounds beautiful next to each other, but what's this new body of research showing you?
Okay, so this body of work emerged from like my own quest to develop. Like, we're existing as human beings and we want to get better every day, right? And so you notice that, you know, you can operate from a place of fear, or, you know, we have this brain, how can we unlock our human potential? And I read The Secret a long time ago. And I thought to myself, is that possible, that our thoughts produce our world, or the reality, or thoughts and our feelings produce our world? And so
it's a really cool idea. You're thinking all day, might as well think about the good stuff. That's how I thought.
But it's not easy.
Yeah,
it's not easy.
You realize quick that it's not that easy.
It's not that easy. You can't just think yourself into bliss. Yeah. You can, but it takes practice. But the point was that, so, you know, down this rabbit hole, and I'm not a religious scholar, nor am I like some kind of, you know, hypnotherapist when I talk about the modalities and stuff. But I think that there's a really important conversation to be held because, again, if we approach it from just a logical, pragmatic perspective, let's just have the conversation. There's the conversation on self-development that's happening here. And a lot of it is like mindset and the law of attraction. And I know people cringe when I say that, but we don't have to call it that. We can say your output and your input, what you put out into the world and what you receive to the world. So you don't have to call it that. So there's this conversation that's happening, and then there's Islam and all of these things that I've been taught from when I was a little kid that were never framed to me in this way, but they're already there. And so I started to see that it's not that they're perfectly aligned, that they're one for one. It's that our religion is so it's the universality of Islam is such that not only is it a governing tool,
it's integrated in the system,
a code of conduct. Not only is it a governing body, not only does it teach us how to attain a good akhirah, it teaches us how to unlock our greatest potential even while we're here. Yeah. It's a tool of self-development. So this body of work is like, how can we align these principles so that it's easily accessible to people? We don't have to go outside of our own faith to find these principles that can help us unlock our great potential while we're here. And what are the processes? Oh my God. Once you realize that even in Islam, that God gives us daily processes that are taught by gurus in a different form. Yeah. I don't want to call them gurus, experts, self-developers, whatever you call them. Experts in that conversation, you're like, Ma'ule? Yeah. It's already here? Then
I've been doing it every day too praying.
Yes, but Jafar, you can't see something until it's time for you to see it.
Yeah, of course.
So the point is that we're doing them so monotonously.
Like robots.
And because we don't have that perspective, and because we're not looking for that, we're not attuned to it, we're not seeing it as a modality.
We're not looking for it, you said.
Yeah, we're not looking for it. We're not realizing it in our experiences. Yeah. It's not registering for us in those beneficial ways that it was originally intended to benefit.
Like you're saying, like when I pray, I'm praying because God told me to pray. I'm not praying looking for
the spiritual,
mental,
the mental benefit. Okay, so let's backtrack. Okay,
Do
so
it.
we're not speaking in general terms.
Yeah.
Okay, so what this body of work is aligning the principles of, like, I guess you would say, not aligning them, but demonstrating the ways in which the tools of self-development, unlocking your greatest potential, are embedded in Islam in terms of doctrine. I'm talking Quran. Fact of the fact. I'm not even trying to get you like in the politics of hadiths and stuff. Although there is one hadith by Imam Ali that is crystal clear, and the universe lies within you, and I have that quote with me. But it's aligning the principles of self-development in which Dr. Joe Dispenza, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Gabby Bernstein, Esther Hicks, I'm naming you the big people in this conversation right now, Lewis Hayes, that will talk about how to unlock a good life, how to attune yourself to good, because you will only achieve in life what you believe is possible for yourself. You will only achieve, and some of us have been doing this like belief thing before we even knew what it was. Like when I described how I got to Ann Arbor, if you want to call that, it was manifestation in their lingo, but it was really just a belief and a head and heart coherence, a visualization. And I'm not saying you're always going to achieve that, but you also have, like, it's a multitude of things, right? If it's planned for, if you believe it for yourself, what's yours will never miss you. You have tawakkul and all of these other principles that are competing. You're manifesting before you know that you're manifesting. Right?
This is like how you go outside and you just get a whiff of fresh air, because these terms of manifest and gratitude and like they've become so overused. Yeah. Like
nobody wants to listen.
Yeah, like please again. Okay.
Yeah. So this is why I think that this body of work is important, because it's not about that. It is about that.
Yeah.
But it's that this is here.
Yeah.
It doesn't contradict our religion in any capacity. I mean, some of the things I'm sure do contradict what we say, but what these people are doing, dancing around a central Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dancing around the language of God, down to the exact verses in our Quran. And I'm going to give you a few examples right now, but it's already there for us. How beautiful that is. How to make our youth, how to make our generation, your generation, the generation after us, fall in love with their deen, that they don't even have to look outside of themselves if they want to unlock their greatest potential. Right. And that the key to unlocking a better life is already in our religion. Let me give you an example.
Please do.
Okay. So for example, one of the principles of like the laws of attraction is to be grateful.
Right.
Right. And God says in the Quran, why gratitude? Gratitude, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about the energy of gratitude, how number one, it talks to you, it makes your subconscious mind feel like the event that you want already happened. So be grateful for something before it even happens for you. Let me just give you to give you an example, like to be grateful for the outcome that you desire before it even happens, because the energy of gratitude increases your...
Interesting, before it even happens.
Yeah, before it even happens.
Okay.
That in order to get to where you want to go, you have to be grateful for where you are. From where you are.
Yes.
And be grateful before it even came. Because that will unlock that feeling, in your subconscious mind will work to pull that experience in for you. But God says it so clearly in the Quran, فَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And then another thing is, like Gabby Bernstein, and I'm just giving you very surfaced examples. Gabby Bernstein will say, surrender to what is of the highest good. Let the universe do for you what you cannot do for yourself, First of all, that's tawakkul in and 100%. Of itself. Don't even tell me that's not tawakkul. Surrender is 100% tawakkul and just trust in God. But God also says in the Quran, and I don't want to misquote, so I'm just going to pull it up. Yeah, because I don't want to misquote that. But he says... وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم
Yeah.
وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم.
Right.
So they talk about, like, in these conversations, how things will work out for you better than you would have imagined them for yourself.
Yeah.
Are you serious? God already told me that,
Yeah.
you know? And there are others, like the list will go on
Give
and
me
on.
more examples.
The grad
If
of
you have
the,
more examples,
yeah, the energy of abundance. You want more wealth, you have to, like, wealth, it can be measured by an amount of money, or it can be measured by just the richness of your life,
Right.
you know, abundance in all of its form, an abundance of love, an abundance
Health, relationships, all these stuff.
an abundance, right? So you want to live an abundant life. They say how you should give a lot, even though you don't have, because that will unlock abundance for you. Charity runs through every facet of our religion.
Right.
Zakat, khumus, sadaqah. We're taught to give and give and give. But the point is that when we learn these things growing up, right, we learn them as a way to advance, to get us to a good afterlife.
Right. Right.
You know, this will get you to heaven.
Yeah.
The self has always been secondary. I've had conversations with religious scholars where, you know, one scholar told me, and I think that makes sense, the goal, especially from a cultural perspective, has always been to advance the institution of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But this is like man's goal,
Right.
not the real goal of Islam, right? Is to advance Islam as an institution and get us to a better afterlife. But if we revisit these things as like to unlock our highest quality of life here, everything is within us.
Yeah.
And so I want to just go back to how I'm not the first person to talk about this, right? Like,
Okay.
from an Islamic perspective, there are many people that are doing this work. And I don't know if you've ever heard Sheikh or Brother Khalil Jafar's, I think that's, yeah, it's The End of Negative Suffering.
I'm not familiar with that.
He talks about subconscious minds and modalities, and it's a great lecture series. Like, if you bring him on your show, let me co-host.
Okay. Will do.
But yeah, and there are, like, Talal Turfi talks about energy in Islam. For example, he wrote a book about it, how we are all energy. And I don't want to get into that part of it, how everything is energetic.
What are you interested in?
I'm interested in bridging that conversation so that we can see self-development and process
As already, it's
already embodied.
integrated
And I want to get to the processes in a minute.
Yeah.
Of how, like, oh my God, God is even showing us how to subconsciously reprogram our subconscious mind. Like, thank you, God, for this beautiful life. But my point is that I'm not the first person to have this conversation, but I think that it should be clearer. And we should, when we revisit it, not that it should be clear, it's to bridge the gap between this conversation in a very, like, structured way.
Yeah.
That's the body of research. So, like, you have, you know, taqwa is another thing that I want to talk about in terms of, like, energy and God consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
God consciousness, that's another thing. And so they say, like, Esther Hicks will talk about source within you, aligning with source. When you feel bad, you're pinched off from the way the source within you sees something. Or
Source within you, what does that mean?
it's like your inner being, you know? It's like your inner being.
Yeah.
Or they talk about the universe. Universe for me is code word for God.
Yeah.
It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we don't have to think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anymore as up.
Yeah.
You know how we used to pray up?
Yeah.
God is everywhere. He says it in the Quran. He's closer to us. حبل الوريد.
Yep.
ونحن أقرب إليه من حبل الوريد. Right? And so taqwa is taught to us all the time, operating with a God consciousness. But also, like, God is so close to us that we don't have to really see it as a separate thing. Like, see it as outside of us is what I'm saying. That
it can be within us. It is within us.
the source is God. God is the source, and the source is not outside of us. He's with us. He's helping us. He's guiding us. He's with us. And so, but he also says in the Quran that in the Quran or Hadith, I forget exactly where, but that your mind, there's a verse in the Quran is about changing a calm, that you can't change a calm unless you change until they change themselves. That's the English translation. So what does that signal to you? You can't make a change in your life unless you perceive that change possible for you. And that your mind you cannot achieve in life more than what your mind, subconsciously or consciously, believes is possible for you. So let's say you grew up, let's go to the processes. So that's how it's aligned. Do you have any questions about that?
No, I'm with you.
Like, in terms of like how it's aligned. I just want to make sure before we move on to that.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is if I have a goal and like a lot of people say like, yeah, shoot for the moon. And that's exactly what you're saying. Like, if I actually believe I can be on the moon, I should shoot for the moon.
Yeah, because God is limitless. وَهُوَ عَنْدِي كَثِيرٌ وَهُوَ عَلَيْكَ سَهْلٌ يَسِيرٌ.
Yeah.
We say that in Dua al-Iftitah.
Yeah.
It's so big for me, but it's so easy for you.
Right.
So yeah, you can. I'm not saying I shoot like that.
Yeah.
Just try to survive. But
why? If it's there.
No, I do. Well, because it depends on what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I don't physically want to go to the moon right now.
Yeah.
You know, maybe to see some architecture on Mars, which is really fascinating to me. We'll see. But the point is that we're being facetious right now. But the point is that you should, you have to believe what is possible for you in order to achieve it. But that energy that, these scholars are talking about in this subconscious reprogramming, you have to sometimes lay new pipes, the way Esther Hicks says. You have to lay it down because we've all grown up with subconscious programming from the ages of 0 to 7 that have taught us how to think, how to operate, how to feel. And they are our fears and our limitations, but our only limitation is yourself.
We're programmed pretty well. To be a certain way.
Yeah, and
it takes a lot to reprogram that.
Yeah, so one thing that it presumes is that you have to take accountability for everything in your life.
Everything is on you.
Yeah, not that you did it on purpose to destroy yourself.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But that how you are perceiving is what's showing up in your experience. Let me just give you this is easier said than done to rework this reprogramming, and I'm not going to get into the neuroplasticity of it or the neuroscientist but there are different modalities that these experts talk about, right? So for example, they'll talk about meditation, they'll talk about hypnotherapy, they'll talk about EFT tapping. Do you know what that is? Have you ever heard of it? Emotional freedom tapping, which like interrupts your subconscious thoughts your conscious thoughts whenever your nervous system is activated by a thought or a feeling. You EFT tap on these pressure points and rewire your subconscious mind or your brain to disassociate.
Is that legit?
Yeah. There's a lot of science backed up by it. And there is affirmations, for example. These are what they say.
Yeah. What do we say?
Ooh, we say a lot of good things, as it turns out. So Ho'oponopono. I'm going to explain Ho'oponopono in a second.
Yeah.
So then when you go back to Islam, you're like, Ho'oponopono, what's that? And that is a Hawaiian tradition. There is so much scientific evidence behind Ho'oponopono, for example, that shows that this process of repeating 4 phrases, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. You just repeat those in your mind anytime you have a thought that is a limiting belief.
Yeah.
A limitation or a fear or a worry or something like that. You just interrupt that thought. This is how you have to persistently lay new framework.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
then I forgive you.
Please forgive me.
Please forgive
Please
me.
forgive me my subconscious programming.
Okay.
Thank you for showing this process.
Gratitude
I love
and
you.
love. I love you.
Okay. So that's Ho'oponopono. Dr. Hugh Len, decades ago, used this process in a psychiatric ward where they were criminal inmates. So much science behind it where he just did this process, and on their own, he did this process for them, gifted them this Ho'oponopono. They were like, they did so much better. They were relocated. The behaviors changed.
When are you
Whatever.
doing this?
The Ho'oponopono, you can do it all day.
Okay.
You can do it all day. Every time you have a limiting belief. This is only one modality of subconscious reprogramming. How do you lay new pipes, right? What are the processes?
Right.
So part one, what are the principles? Part two is what are the processes?
Right.
So the second thing, so Ho'oponopono is like, you can say this all day, but what does God tell us?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we were to do a direct translation of Ho'oponopono, I'm sorry, al-afu. If you get up for Salat al-Lail, you're saying al-afu 300 times.
That's true. Yeah.
But let's just say Tasbihat al-Zahra, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar.
Right.
But let's do a direct translation of Ho'oponopono. I'm sorry, al-afu. Please forgive me. Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. Thank you. Shukr lillah. I love you. Alhamdulillah. Subhanallah. All these things that unlock love.
Translate to love.
But we are taught these things daily. We are encouraged to do them as mustahabs and as even in our salah. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. You want to talk about Ho'oponopono or a version of it? Did I need Ho'oponopono to... No. Let's go to meditation, for example. Esther Hicks talks about how, meditation can calm your mind. We know that Prophet Muhammad used to meditate a lot in the cave and beyond, and that it was during his meditations that he would receive the wahi. We know how good meditation is. But then what we also know is that, like Esther Hicks, for example, will say the best time to meditate is in the morning when you first wake up. God gives us Salat al-Subh every single day. At the crack of dawn, we get up. Our mind is still settled. It's still in theta.
Yeah.
And when you revisit these processes and you see how there's a one-for-one, Salat al-Subh becomes a washwashe.
Yeah.
A whisper, a sweet whisper between you and God as a means to, you're like, oh, I'm reprogramming. I'm setting the tone for my day. I'm reprogramming my subconscious mind. And there are others besides, like affirmations, this daily tasbih. So then when you revisit these processes, Laylat al-Qadr doesn't just become anymore this like list of like 7 du'as that you have to do so you can check it off.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, let me do 1 or 2 du'as and really feel the energy and reprogram my subconscious mind more than it is just a checklist. They become guided meditations. They become daily affirmations. They become, it becomes a daily mode of conscious reprogramming that you can utilize to try to reprogram your subconscious mind and lay new pipes.
Yeah. I was telling you also before we started that about the beads, the masbaha.
Yeah.
I took a BS yoga and meditation class for the credits before I graduated.
It's not BS. It was a good class that you took.
I took it just to
graduate.
graduate.
You took it, yeah.
Oh yeah. No, the class I'm pretty sure was good, but I just needed it. I just needed an easy class. But there was a lesson just about the beads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, we do this every day. And then the other people in the class were fascinated by like, oh, these beads and like what you say gratitude and count.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, like we have 1 million of these at home.
Yeah, we have 1 million of them at home, and the really good masbahas, the ones that are not plastic. Yeah, they're made of crystals.
Yeah.
The beat, like if we're going to talk about the physicality of, the masbaha itself and the healing properties of different crystals and whatever. But then also, like the affirmation, the repetition of what we're saying about around the beads. Yeah, it's already in our religion, but how many, I'm not even gonna lie, it took me decades of my life before I realized that Islam was a tool of self-development too, in addition to all these other great things. That Islam also gives me the prescription to self-develop, to gives people the prescription to heal their inner wounds, to move past the struggle, to have tawakkul, to trust that everything is working out for me, not me, a person. To have tawakkul that وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, that everything is going to work out no matter what, and that, you know, you can come out of suffering, and that we hold all of the tools inside of us, that everything that we could ever want is within us. Like, I'm just going to read this hadith from Imam Ali that I think is, again, another fact of the fact, because the Quran was revealed for both, to all of us. So I'm really careful not to like interpret things outside of just their meaning, just a direct translation.
Right.
And again, like from an approach where this is just fact of the fact.
Noha is not a scholar.
I'm not a religious scholar.
A religious scholar.
Your sickness is from you, but you do not perceive it. And your remedy is within you, but you do not sense it. So how many people, they say like your mindset when you're sick to heal plays a big factor when you're diagnosed with like a terminal illness or something. I mean, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِيَدِ اللَّهِ, of course, but like your mindset and healing physically and emotionally.
And you've heard stories a lot about people that cured their chronic illness from within themselves.
You presume you are a small entity, but within you is enfolded the entire universe. You are indeed the evident book by whose alphabets the hidden becomes manifest. Therefore, you have no need to look beyond yourself. What you seek is within you if only you reflect. So it's like Esther Hicks says, everything you already need. You have to find satisfaction and gratitude from where you're at. But Imam Ali is telling us that you have all the answers inside of you. I don't need Esther. I love their work. Don't get me wrong. We don't need to dismiss it. God even says, take the truths and the goods from everybody.
Of course.
But it's just fascinating to see that it's already in our deen. So now my questions, so my first body of work, if the question was, what can discourse on hijab reveal to us about the mechanisms of U.S. imperialism?
Yeah.
Now the question is, what is our greatest source of self-regard? How can we bridge the gap between who we are now and who we want to become? You know?
Yeah.
That's a new question. And how can Islam be the bridge? How can Islam help me get there? Or the principles of Islam, the foundations of Islam, the practices of Islam. How can my deen or our deen help us get there? And how can it help guide our youth?
That's where, I mean, we all need like this type of information. Yeah. And we all need to apply this work, but providing it for the youth, that these terms are so attractive to them. Like taking control over my life, like law of attraction, like I have to like meditate and be grateful, and it's all there.
It's all
there. You were telling me that we can't blame our parents for not showing us this, because
absolutely
it was a different time for them, like a time of war, a time of we just need to survive. We don't want the religion to die.
Yes.
We need you just to stay Muslim.
Yes.
And now, rather than blaming them, they did their part and they kept it alive for us. Now our part is taking what they didn't teach us, apply it to ourselves, and teach us to our kids. Teach that to our kids.
Definitely. Listen, I really resent conversations where we look at let's say, we have limiting beliefs based on our upbringing.
Right.
Or, we can just be frank, not necessarily personally, anecdotally or whatever, but we can say like people have had rough upbringings and, whatever it is, or we weren't taught Islam from this perspective. We were
absolutely
always taught like
the doctrines and
to love yourself, like self-love or self-mercy, it's selfish. We were always taught like it's, culturally, that's like what it is. Like it's selfish to love yourself, or what you have to do in order to you got to be kind to yourself.
Of course.
But I resent conversations where like we look back at what our parents did or our upbringings, and then we resent them and we blast them on this journey of healing. That's not absolutely not. True healing is an understanding that they did the best that they could with the circumstances that they had.
Absolutely.
They had limited access. And in our culture, we had our parents in waves. Diaspora sent people to new places, new homes, a new language, a new culture.
It was so hard.
It was,
them.
we never.
It's easy to resent and point a finger. Like, oh yeah, we don't know this because my parents never taught me.
They were fugitives of war.
Yeah.
They were fugitives of war. And no, they never taught us. And you know what? They didn't know either.
Right.
So that's okay. We just have to look at them from a lens of love where, you know what? They did the best they could. I'm not justifying situations where a child was abused or,
absolutely,
you know, atrocious things happen in people's houses 100%. But you know what, Jafar? I also always say you cannot step into a new identity if you keep dwelling on the past. You cannot step into a new self or a new future or a new hope if you continue. And I know you like to tell, I know people like to tell stories on your podcast, and you're all about telling stories, and stories are good, you know, but what I say about, but to a certain extent, you can't, when you keep yourself attached to a label, attached to an atrocious experience, attached to a hardship, and you keep repeating that over and over, you can't step into anything new by consistently replaying what happened. Mm-hmm. The good thing about our subconscious mind, our life, our programming is we all have access to the now. Yeah. You can just say, okay, my parents, for example, this was the best they could do. I know now, so now I'm going to take control of my life. Absolutely. Now I'm going to unlock a greater potential in myself, and I'm going to practice, and I'm going to, you know, be persistent, and I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to be merciful on myself when I fail because it's hard. Yeah. But to point a finger outwards, that's the complete opposite of any of what this self-development is.
And keep feeling sorry for ourselves. You feel like we do that a lot. You know, like I can't, I have a lot's happening in my life, you know. Like, wallah, it's hard. But
I can't because of this.
Yeah. My parents, divorced.
It's your fault. Everybody's so toxic in my life. Like, maybe you're the toxic one. Yeah. Because, not you. But because this is what I think. So this is what I think. If you know, the cure lies within us. What you perceive of the world is a direct reflection of what's going on inside. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then if you're so fixated on people being toxic, maybe you're toxic. Yeah. If you're so fixated on, you know, circumstances, like maybe you're inhibiting yourself is what I think of those conversations. And I don't wish to reduce people's struggle. I really don't. I have a lot of empathy, you know, and one thing I never want to do is like the opposite of ita'amaling with love and of course, compassion is like, you're not there yet. That's not true healing.
And you're not walking on the street telling everyone that you see like, hey, no, you have to stop feeling sorry for yourself. But I mean, if every one of us starts with our small circle, and if you have a very close friend and she keeps feeling sorry for herself and she keeps...
You gently redirect.
Yeah.
You gently redirect. But that is a lot of the conversation is, we feel sorry for ourselves. We feel victims. We blame outward circumstances. And look, I'm not saying that all of those things don't exist.
But they exist for everyone.
Yes. And you can. Listen, the law of attraction can't think you out of systems of oppression. It can't think us out of racism. Actually, God has even a prescription of that. He tells us in the Quran, he created us in tribes so that we can talk to each other. And there's everything in the Quran. But my point is that, like, we all have access to the now, and you can come out of it. Yeah.
No, this was a very intriguing conversation, really. And is there a timeline when this body of work can be done so we can like take a look into it? Is it going to take you a few years as well?
Yeah, it's going to take a while. Okay. It's going to not a few years. Hopefully we'll see. But it's just in the earliest stages, and you know, who knows what form it's gonna take.
Yeah.
You know, it can take different forms. But right now it's just like in these conversational circles to get us to start thinking about it.
And whenever, like, when you go deeper into it, I'm pretty sure you're going to find some more fascinating stuff. We can have another conversation.
So much.
We can sit down and have another conversation.
For sure.
Thank you so much, Noha. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And that's it.